Anything that would allow Native Hawaiians to not pay state taxes would have to be agreed to by the state of Hawaii. I do not envision that the state of Hawaii would agree to such a thing.
What about public land use?
All of those kinds of specific kinds of questions that you're asking me has to do with what the negotiations will result in. And as I said, this entity, this group cannot just come up with whatever they want. There are parameters that would govern. They're still members of the United States. They're still citizens of the United States. With all the rights and privileges of citizens of the United States.
Yet this proposed status differs significantly from Native American status under Indian law, correct?
Native Hawaiians were not constituted as tribes. Native Hawaiians were not constituted as tribes, as most of us, I think, understand tribes.
Right.
But they were a separate nation. They were a kingdom. We had treaties. Native Hawaiians had, the Kingdom of Hawaii had treaties with the United States. They were acknowledged as a nation. As I said, because they were not constituted as tribes, does not mean that they are not indigenous peoples. They are.
Yes, indeed. My questions arise from the sovereignty issues that continue to be shaped and litigated with regard to Indian law and the relationship of sovereign nations within the auspices of Indian law to the United States and to state governments, local governments, county governments. So my questions I pose to try to avoid some of the unanswered questions, that continue to sort of plague inadequately fleshing out some of these issues with regard to the relationship between Indian law and non-Indian law. So thank you very much.
Would you yield for a moment?
Indeed.
Yes, I think a lot of these questions, they're good questions and they should be answered, and I think you can get a practical, everyday governing answer from Mr. Kani when he testifies. He is the chairman of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, and virtually everything that you just asked in everyday practice is being dealt with by Mr. Kani, and I have every confidence that he'll be able to not just answer them, but provide a perspective as to practically how this works. And of course, Mr. Young is here and has more than 3 decades experience of how the practical realities of dealing with questions like sovereignty are handled. So the 1.8 million acres wasn't seen as worth anything. The 200,000 acres that Mr. Kani administers right now, again, we're seen as, well, we'll just give that to the Hawaiians. Nobody wants it. There's no water. There's no infrastructure. There's no anything. It's not useful to anybody who wants to make money out of it, so we'll give that to the Native Hawaiians. The reason that you get these questions now, in all honesty, Doc, and everybody else, assets, land and money, assets, land and money. Now, come to 2010. How would you like to have, Doc, 1.8 million acres of land in Hawaii today? How would you like to have 200,000 acres in additional land reserved for Hawaiians by congressional act?
I'm always open to negotiation.
Yeah, that's right. So when we come down to it, when you get right down to the nitty-gritties of all of this, this has nothing to do with the Constitution. This has nothing to do with race. This has to do with assets.
Commission Act passed in 1921 by the Congress. The descendants, and by the way, the big merchants that were there controlling the economy, you call them the Big Five, if you will, were descendants of these missionaries who came to the islands, gave us the Bible, and now they own the land and the Hawaiians own the Bible. And we have a nice statement from those of us from the islands. The missionaries came to do good, and they did very well. And in essence, Mr. Chairman, this Homestead Commission Act was passed. The 200,000 acres are the worst portions of the land given to the Native Hawaiians, supposedly to get them back to agriculture and to become self-sufficient, as it was the dream and the aspirations of Prince Kuhio when he served as a territorial delegate for 20 years. And sad story to say, that was the Hawaiians' trail of many tears, because they continue to suffer. From 1921, were never given any opportunity to collectively be part of the economy, if you will, and then for all these years, this is how they've suffered. And I thank the gentlelady from Wyoming for good questions, and I sincerely hope that she will join us in appreciating what these Native peoples have had to endure. And I thank the gentleman from Alaska for his support in this bill. Thank you.
On the strictly administrative side, there is no impact, according to the OMB, both from the previous administration, and I expect it won't be any different from this. The other thing is that it'll probably have a positive impact on the federal treasury, because business will be done, taxes will be paid as a result that we wouldn't otherwise presently have any opportunity to collect, because we can't get anything going until we get this thing done. But I think actually it's going to help Hawaii enormously, and more taxes both locally and nationally will be paid.
Thank you. Our next panel, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time if I butcher the pronunciation of some of the names, but I will call up the Honorable Micah Kani, the Chairman of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, Kapoia, Hawaii, the Honorable Honi Apohihina. Neil, would you like to introduce the panel?
They gonna help you out here. Haunani Apoliana, okay?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the committee. We appreciate the distance you've traveled in some cases and the time that you've given to be with us today. We do have all of your prepared testimonies, and they will be made part of the record as if actually read. And you are encouraged to summarize, and you may proceed in the order in which I introduced you and in the manner you wish.
Thank you, Chairman Ray Hall.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Hastings, Representative Abercrombie, Representative Hirono, and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify in strong support of this measure. My name is Micah Kane. I'm the chairman of the Hawaiian Homes Commission. I also serve as the director of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, the entity that Representative Abercrombie alluded to in prior testimony. I come here with the support of our Republican governor and the support of our Republican Attorney General. I'd also like to thank our Representative Abercrombie for his continued support back home across the aisle. As he stated earlier, this is not a partisan issue. Many of the comments coming from those who have concerns about this measure seem to think that this bill may draw a line in the sand between those who have and those who have not, when in reality it builds a bridge. And I know it's difficult for many of you who do not come from our island to feel that, but it truly is the case. And I stand on the remainder of my testimony and thank you for your continued support. Mahalo.
Chairman Ray Hall, Representative Hastings, Congressman Abercrombie, Congresswoman Hirono, and members of the Committee on Natural Resources. I'm Honani Apuliona. I'm Native Hawaiian, elected to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs Board of Trustees in 1996, and since 2000 have served as the chairperson of the 9-member elected Board of Trustees, 2 of whom are here today, Trustee Akana and Trustee Machado behind me, along with our Board of Trustees Counsel, former Associate Justice of the Hawaii State Supreme Court, Robert Klein. Mahalo for holding this hearing today. As was stated much earlier this morning, it is a special day. It is a holiday in our state for King Kamehameha, honoring this Native Hawaiian leader, indigenous leader who unified the Hawaiian Islands. So OHA proudly is here today to testify in support of H.R. 2314. In diverse and varied support, and certainly the Native leadership of this country is supportive of this recognition bill for Hawaiians.
So the major factions, indigenous peoples of our country,
absolutely,
American Indians and the Native Alaskans,
they stand with us,
fully support this.
They stand with us and they say, hurry up.
Now, come to 2010. How would you like to have, Doc, 1.8 million acres of land in Hawaii today? How would you like to have 200,000 acres in additional land reserved for Hawaiians by congressional act? Again, we're seen as, well, we'll just give that to the Hawaiians. Nobody wants it. There's no water. There's no infrastructure. There's no anything. It's not useful to anybody who wants to make money out of it, so we'll give that to the native Hawaiians. Now, come to 2010. How would you like to have, Doc, 1.8 million acres of land in Hawaii today? How would you like to have 200,000 acres in additional land reserved for Hawaiians by congressional act?
I'm always open to negotiation.
Yeah, that's right. So when we come down to it, when you get right down to the nitty-gritties of all of this, this has nothing to do with the Constitution. This has nothing to do with race. This has to do with assets, land and money. And when that 1.8 million acres wasn't yielding any money, when that 200,000 acres was out there and it didn't have any value to them, let me tell you, now you got 2 million acres of land in Hawaii. You got hundreds of millions of dollars in funds that are under the care of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs right now, which will go to this new entity, and you've got an income stream in the tens of millions of dollars coming from the lease arrangements on either the ceded lands or the Hawaiian homelands, so that you can build houses, you can put infrastructure in. Now, everybody's interested that they're not discriminated against. And what they mean is how can they get in on owning, controlling, maneuvering, and manipulating that 2 million acres of land? Is how can they get in on owning, controlling, maneuvering, and manipulating that 2 million acres of land? Is how can they get in on owning, controlling, maneuvering, and manipulating that 2 million acres of land, the hundreds of millions of dollars, and the tens of millions of dollars of income stream? I rest my case.
Well,
I'm out of time, but I